part 2 in the case of Donald's cunning COVID con. I'm George Wilson. Welcome to These Political Times. Okay, to pick up where we left off in our last session, how did a man with such an unsavory past become the President of the United States? Well, there are lots of theories, but the most common, at least among people who study these things, is that Trump possessed an uncanny ability to tap into the anger and resentment of working-class whites. But that raises the question, what were they so angry about? And who or what caused all that anger? Who did they think was to blame? Which, of course, begs another question. What made them think a privileged con man who'd spent his career taking advantage of the little guy would be capable of making them feel better, or would even bother to try? First, as far as the origins of their anger goes, according to political analysts, they were upset because their jobs had been shipped overseas, and then they got hit by the 2008 financial crisis. And let's face it, if you'd lost your job and maybe even your home, and then had to stand by and watch as every high-level banker responsible skates free, you'd be angry too. But Trump had all the answers. It was the Democrats' fault. They did it, by God. They let all those immigrants take your jobs and then offshored the rest. Did I mention scapegoats are a dime a dozen in Trump world? As for who is responsible, there's plenty of blame to go around, believe me. But I'll let you decide if Trump was right, that the Democrats were exclusively to blame. After all, it was corporate America, the prime benefactors of Trump's own party, the Republicans, and consequently the prime beneficiaries of all the Republican Party's pay-to-play policies, from their shameful trickle-down economic scam to tax cuts for billionaires. But it was the Republican Party that turned its back on American workers in the first place. It's also true that every recession in the last 60 years has started in a Republican administration, including the last one. Unfortunately, when it comes to elections, emotion and anger often trump the truth, which, as we've seen, and true to his name, is what Donald Trump does best. Still, contrary to their own best interests, why did so many Americans willingly buy what such an obviously unprincipled, self-centered carnival barker was selling? I mean, come on. If they really believed Donald Trump could cure their economic woes, I've got a Trump steak or two to sell them. Or how about some Trump water, or Trump vodka, or Trump menswear, or Trump deodorant? The list of his failed products is staggering. It wasn't even a record of hit or miss. It was miss every time. And given his extraordinary record of failures, what made his supporters think his latest product, Donald Trump as President of the United States, would be any different? Would he even be content with the title? Or would his inflated ego demand that he rebrand it Trump's President of the United States? And given his pandemic response, not to mention his gigantic tax cut that he bestowed on himself, that's kind of how things worked out, isn't it? But his supporters, the people who actually voted for him, were willing to overlook all those business failures and product flops, and even his character flaws, because, as it turned out, they weren't just driven by anger. Exit surveys showed they also bought into his long-cultivated fictional image as a fabulously successful, self-made businessman. Hook, line, and stinker. I mean sinker. Where's that Trump deodorant when you need it? Of course, we have Mark Burnett, producer of The Apprentice, to thank for restoring a serially bankrupt businessman to an icon of American business success. All that positive PR not only rehabilitated Donald's reputation, but it also gave him the credibility he needed to be taken seriously. Surely, with his extraordinary management expertise, he'd be able to fix the lives of all those disgruntled whites, right? Especially since he could so readily identify with them. Oh yes, it's true. Donald has his own inherent disgruntlement. For years, he'd yearned to be accepted by New York's notoriously snobbish high society. But no matter how hard he tried, they gave him nothing but the cold shoulder. According to accounts, they considered him a brash loudmouth, given to serial bankruptcies and cheating his subcontractors. Now, where do you suppose they got a crazy idea like that? But like I said, to his supporters, Donald Trump was the ultra-successful businessman he claimed to be. You know, that guy he played on TV? He couldn't profitably run his own family business, but suddenly, miraculously, he was deemed qualified to run the single largest enterprise in the world, the U.S. government. Go figure. And that, dear listener, as luck would have it, is how, when our nation was struck with the deadliest virus in over a century, we came to find ourselves at the mercy of a self-promoting fabulous known for his insensitivity, poor judgment, and divisive rhetoric. I suppose I could have just said he's a narcissist and saved some time, since those are all traits subsumed by that problematic personality disorder. But that's a technical designation that I'll be digging into in greater detail in my next series, entitled Poor Little Donnie, The Pathology of a Loser. But back to having the inept, bungling Donald Trump lead America into battle with the viciously deadly disease. It was like trying to fight a war with faulty intelligence, to coin a phrase. You never knew if he was telling the truth or sabotaging our efforts. Talk about bad timing. How bad? Well, let's just say if farcical ineptitude were a management technique, that's one book Donald could write. Let's see. Chapters could include dangerous incompetence, corruption and the art of misdirection, and how to be a murderous thug without lifting a finger, or rather, while lifting only one finger, in Donald's middle-digit salute to American democracy. With his head firmly stuck in the sand, he caused the economy to be wrecked. Yet he insisted on emblazing his name on all the relief checks. Well, this delayed everything because the checks had to be retooled. Well, Donald claimed innocence, but nobody was fooled. In fact, people everywhere agreed the president was to blame, and that everything he touched was just another con game. Now, as I previously noted, the U.S. is considered the leader in fighting infectious disease. So naturally, the inept U.S. response to COVID-19 left the rest of the world mystified. How could this be? Especially given Donald Trump's keen scientific mind. What's that, you say? Keen scientific mind? Oh, you haven't heard? Okay, well, let me take a minute here and I'll try to explain. He first mentioned his scientific bent the day he visited one of the vaccine makers, Pfizer. Now, according to Donald, Pfizer's scientists were surprised by how quickly he'd managed to grasp the science of virology, the complexities of which had taken them years to master. And judging by the looks on their faces as he recounted this story, he was right. They were surprised. Stunned might be a better word for it. But maybe they shouldn't have been. I mean, think about it. As we've all come to learn from Donald over the years, thanks to his rejection of even false modesty, narcissism, anyone, but as we've all come to learn, he's an expert at everything he's ever tried, even things he's never tried. Hey, maybe that's how that rumor got started, that he had a special plan to prove he really could master anything he put his mind to, no matter how challenging. Now, according to the rumor, he was planning to travel to Pamplona, Spain, to run with the bulls. Word had it that he felt a special kinship with those magnificent creatures because when it comes to BS, only uncastrated bovines can outproduce Donald Trump. Of course, when Donald caught wind of this rumor, he wasn't happy, especially when he learned who was thought to be responsible for it. One of his rivals for the GOP presidential nomination. Now, some say it was Ron the Deviant DeSantis, but others were just certain it had all the earmarks of a Ted Cruz sleaze operation. But back to Donald's scientific prowess. He told us that day at Pfizer that he must have acquired it from his uncle because he taught physics at MIT. Now, whether it was encoded in Donald's DNA or merely acquired through some sort of telepathic osmosis, whenever he'd get together with his uncle, the professor, he didn't specify, but he did allow us how. He'd often thought maybe he should have gone into medicine instead of running for president. To which I say, hey, it's not too late. Go for it. Why run again in 2024 when your true calling awaits you? But I digress. Getting back to our story, from what I've been told, Donald's supporters are quite perturbed about the title of this series, Donald's Cunning COVID Con. I guess I can understand where they're coming from. After all, they've repeatedly shown they could care less about the concept on which it's based, that being what they call in legal circles, the evidence, in which, in this case, one fact stands out. According to close aides and insiders, when it came to COVID, our ex-president's overriding concern wasn't to save lives, it was to save his presidency. Remember, we didn't elect the President of the United States. We elected Trump's President of the United States. What's best for Trump must be what's best for the rest, right? Still, when his loyal defenders say we should cut him some slack because he was so new to government that he didn't really know what he was doing, they may generally be right, although that seems to have been the case long before he joined the government. But when it comes to COVID and informing people about how to stay safe, Trump's president knew exactly what he was doing. In fact, as he admitted to author Bob Woodward in a recorded interview, no less, he'd been told by the CDC from the very start that COVID-19 was not only deadly, but far more deadly than the flu. But that's not exactly what he told the American people now, is it? Why did he mislead us like that? True, he's allergic to the truth, but I think it goes deeper. It's his entire decision-making process. I call it Trump-centric, and by that I mean the benefits of whatever he decides must first and foremost accrue to his constituency, Donald J. Trump. Yep, Mr. Dealmaker himself, dealing for himself. Take his decision to play down the virus. Let's see, he said it would be gone by April, and of course he told us it was no worse than the flu, which directly contradicted what he told Bob Woodward. He even called it a Democratic hoax. How quaint. But it's not that he's stupid, though there's that. It's just that he thought we were. I mean, did he really think Americans would agree that it was wise for him to roll back public health regulations or undermine science and scientific institutions right when we needed them the most? Oh, I'm not saying he didn't have help, including, well, aside from all those deep-thinking QAnon trendsetters and long-standing anti-vax Luddite fundamentalists, there was Fox News and Senator Rand Paul, who, by the way, wants Dr. Fauci locked up so the senator will never again be tempted to embarrass himself by trying to debate Fauci on the Senate floor. And of course, we mustn't overlook that wackadoodle Senator Ron Johnson of Gargle the Virus Away with Listerine fame, and all the rest of those right-wing misinformation trolls who've bloodied their hands for life and beyond. Item 1, in the case against President Trump's COVID response, deliberately creating doubt about the true danger of the virus that incentivized risky behavior, thus increasing infection rates. Accordingly, as a consequence of his deliberately misleading policies, Trump's critics say he should be charged at a minimum with dereliction of duty. Others are less kind. They say his actions were so irresponsible as to amount to mass murder. They point to the fact that with barely more than 4% of the world's population, the U.S. under Trump suffered nearly 1/5 of its COVID-19 deaths. In fact, throughout Trump's reign of terror, we led the world in both cases and deaths. But his supporters say, hey, he didn't deliberately kill anyone. Therefore, he's only guilty of manslaughter. Well, his Fox News henchmen soon chimed in, helping to sacrifice lives for a big ratings win. They claimed Trump's China ban had saved the day, helping to keep the virus at bay. But his China ban turned out to be practically toothless when they let in 44,000 more from the land of Confucius. Well, it was as if the president were following in the footsteps of Jim Jones, except his cult followers were being forced to die alone. Naturally, despite that silver spoon protruding from Donald's perpetually pouting puss, America's whiner-in-chief, right? But he's always preferred to downplay his inheritance. You know, claim it only amounted to a measly $1 million, when the actual number was more like $300 million. Some even say 400. But hey, that's exclusive of his pre-inheritance, because Daddy Trump was repeatedly having to bail him out of one financial scrape after another. Like the time his daddy had to arrange to purchase $3.5 million worth of gambling chips at a high-stakes blackjack table to help keep the Trump Castle Casino Resort by the Bay from going under the bay. Now, if you're wondering how that seemingly innocuous scam worked, it's simple. The chips were never gambled and never cashed, thus enriching the House and enabling Donald to cover a bond payment that kept the casino open. Illegal? Need you ask? After all, Donald inherited that larcenous heart from a master. Of course, Daddy's fix wasn't to last, since, as you've probably heard, Donald eventually lost every one of his Atlantic City casinos, drove them all right out of business. So his self-proclaimed business acumen may have helped get him elected, but a detailed analysis by the New York Times of regulatory reviews, court records, and security filings left little doubt that Donald's casino business was a protracted failure. Of course, as usual, even as his companies did poorly, Donald did well, proving once again that he's our greatest living con man. He put up little of his own money, shifted personal debts to the casinos, and collected millions in salary, bonuses, and other payments, while the burden of his failures, to the tune ultimately of $1.5 billion, fell on his investors and subcontractors, who, unfortunately, had made the monumental mistake of placing a bet on Trump's so-called business acumen. Ultimately, given the fictions surrounding Donald's management expertise, it was almost as if someone had pulled a practical joke on America, a classic bait and switch. For as president, Donald brought that same managerial skill to the Oval Office that he'd brought to his casinos, with regrettably the same tragic results. After all, when he was confronted with the mother of all disasters, a worldwide pandemic, and with no daddy to bail him out, he proceeded to inflict one of the world's worst responses on his own people. Did he do so deliberately, or was he just living up to his usual level of double-dealing and incompetence? That's a question I intend to address next time in Part 3 of Donald's Cunning COVID Con. So be sure to check back regularly, or better still, subscribe, so I can notify you as soon as it's up and running. And don't forget to click that thumbs up like button too, so I can keep bringing you my take on these political times. Thanks for stopping by.